So I just want to salute and welcome everybody out there, all the ladies and gentlemen. Of course, you're in the Midnight Mirage Masjid of Higher Learning once again. And in this tape, of course, we can go through some more history, get some pictures, and get some more descriptions of the indigenous American who was here prior to the arrival of any European. And also look at how the indigenous American made a lot of agreements and had intermarriages and basically was in union with a lot of the different Stuart, Hebraic, Muslim cultures that came to set up shop here in the Americas. All right. So most of us, we're familiar with the 13 colonies being Europe's first establishment here in the Americas along the eastern coast. But what most of us are not familiar with is that 12 of the 13 colonies were started by Stuart Moorish kings from the island of Britannica. They ruled Wales, Scotland, Ireland, etc. And a lot of them were from the highlands and lowlands of Scotland. So we hear about King James, Charles I, Edward III, etc. They descend from this line. And these people are known historically as the Jacobites or the Israelites. So you have to remember that the throne of England was being ruled by various families. All right. So when we think about the 13 colonies, we need to think about the line of the House of Stuart, because most of the 13 colonies, 12 of them at least, they were set up by the Stuart kings, King James VI and his sons. And one of the 13 colonies, which was Georgia, was started by King George in 1751, I want to say. At least that's what he made slavery legal. All right. So 12 of the 13 colonies were started by a Stuart king, and one of them was started by a German king. But both of these lineages and families of kings were sitting on the throne of Britannica or England at the time of the 13 colonies. So you have to understand that when it comes to things such as slavery actually was not an activity that the ancient Britons really practiced as far as the Scottish and the Stuarts. They had more of an Israelite way of understanding. And some of their intentions for setting up the 13 colonies in America was to get a new start, because Europe had a lot of chaos going on at that time. And it was also to expand the monotheistic kingdom of God, meaning basically a culture where people worship one God. All right. So when the Stuart kings came here, they were practicing and reading the King James Bible. And when they came here, there were a lot of indigenous Americans that already had a Hebraic Muslim culture where they acknowledged and worshiped one God. So when they came, these two types of Shemitic peoples were able to interface and interact with each other because their cultures were the same. So you had Shemitic indigenous people to the Americas, and you had Shemitic indigenous people to Europa and what we know of as Mesopotamia. So these people eventually came over to the Americas as the nobility of Europa, and also as the higher and upper class and the middle class of Europa as well. So what I want to do in this book, as I said, we're going to read a letter by William Penn, and we're going to look at some memoirs from Benjamin Franklin, and just look at some of the various kings and some of the images of the nobles in America, because we are familiar with, let's say, a European king by the name of King James VI. But we also want to learn about certain American kings and emperors. OK, so you have Chief Tuscaloosa, or Tuscaloosa, rather, who was an emperor or a king in modern day what we call Alabama or Alibamu. All right. And you also had Chief Powhatan, who was a king or an emperor of what we call modern day Virginia. So when the Stuarts came here, or the original Scottish and Irish, when they came here, these were not Caucasian Europeans coming here. These were Moorish Europeans coming here, and they were doing business deals with Moorish American people who were here. All right. So when you see a picture of Powhatan in a little while, you'll know how he looked. And probably in a future tape, I'm going to put up a picture of Captain John Smith, because they lied in that movie Pocahontas when they showed you a picture of Captain John Smith being a Caucasian man and showing you a picture of Pocahontas being a so-called Mongoloid Siberian Native American woman. Believe it or not, both of these people would have come from Shemitic or quote unquote Negroid stock. So that means that Pocahontas more than likely would have looked a little bit like the man you see on the picture in front of you. But in a little while, we'll see how her father looked. So before we move forward, let's go into this book, The Negro Question Part 7, Swarthy Memoirs of a Black American Revolution. And we're going to start on page 131. Okay. So let's read the memoirs of the public and private life of William Penn. That's where this information is coming from, because he was an eyewitness account of a lot of the indigenous American people along the Eastern Shore in Pennsylvania, Philadelphia, etc. So let's look at what he wrote. Now, this is, once again, this is information written by William Penn. Okay. This is what he says, quote, "For the natives or the indigenous Indians, I shall consider them in their persons, language, manners, religion, and government. For their persons, they are generally tall, straight, and well built, and of singular proportion. Their complexion is black like the gypsies in England. They grease themselves with bare fat, and using no defense against the sun and weather, their skin must be swarthy." End quote. So this is a quote by William Penn, and he says that the natives or the indigenous people that he saw in the Americas, that they had a black complexion and they looked like the gypsies of England. The gypsies of England descend from the ancient Iberians, and we've talked about that before. Okay. A copper colored indigenous Moorish peoples. All right. So this man that you see in front of you is actually a indigenous American. And as you can see, he's of a swarthy complexion. When they say swarthy, or when they say tawny, that just means a copper colored, a bronze colored, a brown skin complected person, all the way to a light caramel skin complected person. So you know how in the black community, we may say a light skinned person all the way to a dark skinned person. This is what they mean by tawny and swarthy. This was a word used in the medieval period to describe our people a lot. So sometimes you're going to see the word tawny. Sometimes you're going to see the word swarthy. Sometimes you may see the word black. Sometimes you may see the word Swartz. And a lot of the times you're going to see the word Moorish. But all of these are talking about the copper colored indigenous peoples of the Americas. All right. So before we move forward, as William Penn wrote, he said that their complexion is black like the gypsies of England, and that their skin must be swarthy. William Penn not only tells us that the Indians in North America were black, but he tells us that they are black as the Europeans in England. Wow. William Penn also gives us the definition of swarthy. Penn said, quote, "Black is swarthy." Benjamin Franklin said the same thing in 1751. So once again, when you look in that literature and you see that word swarthy, tawny, or Moor or Moorish, they talking about a dark skinned or a copper colored person or an earth tone person. All right. Now, what you're looking at right here is from the Memoirs of Benjamin Franklin, Volume 2, the introduction page. OK. And this is actually found in the Library of Congress. So as you can see right here, they already are depicting Shemitic indigenous Americans, copper colored people. And as you can see, it's two of them. You know, you can see this indigenous man right here, this Moorish man, and it looked like another Moorish person kneeled in front of him, looking at something. So once again, these are the people in the Americas that the indigenous Europeans from the line of Stuart, Ireland, Scotland, Britannica, etc. When they came here, these were just two Negroid or two so-called black people choosing to interface and deal with each other. So the Europeans that we're talking about that came to the Americas were not Caucasian people. They were a Moorish melanated people. All right. So look at this picture. I took this image from the Memoirs of Benjamin Franklin. It was located in the introduction page. What is the point? Benjamin Franklin was like a news reporter at the scene. He reported the news of his generation accurately. I believe Franklin's report. So let's move forward. All right. So here we have right here in front of us a political cartoon that was created in 1780. Britannica reconciles with her daughter America. And this catalog of prints and drawings is found in the British Museum. So you're looking at right here a picture that's in the British Museum. And this is a picture of Britain reconciling with her daughter America. Now, although they have Britain and Europa depicted as Caucasian people, but nevertheless, you're going to see that America is depicted as a Moorish or an indigenous woman. So here you have the picture right here. You can see Britannica is, falsely being depicted as this Caucasian woman, because really Britannica would have been a so-called black woman. And as you can see, America right here is being depicted as a copper colored indigenous woman. She has on the tobacco skirt. She has on the plumed feathered crown on her head. And as you can see, this is a so-called black woman or a woman of color. All right. So this is a picture of America reconciling with Britannica. All right. Because America and Britannica, believe it or not, are distant cousins. Because the Shemites, or the Semitic peoples of the Americas, have a bloodline and a connection through Phrygia, Troy, Brutus, and Britain, have a connection to the ancient people of Scotland, Irish, Welsh, etc., the ancient Druids of Northern Europe. All right. So that's what you're looking at, this picture right here in front of you, a political cartoon. Let's read. It should be apparent to you by now that the people of the 18th century drew and depicted the American Indians as they actually knew them, black. Benjamin Franklin said, quote, "America is swarthy." It appears that he was not lying. Lady America and the American Indians are depicted as black people. The Statue of Liberty used to be called Lady America and was depicted as a black woman. Now that the whites are in power, the black Lady America has become the white Statue of Liberty. So as I told you all, most of the indigenous American women who were really used in a lot of the, symbols, emblems, etc., they replaced them for Caucasian women. OK, they replaced them for Caucasian women. So, most of the empresses and the ancient queens of America, these were so-called black women. I mean, I got tons and tons and tons of pictures of them, But Benjamin Franklin, just like William Penn in the 1700s, he was stating that not only was majority of Europa swarthy, but he also said that America is swarthy, meaning that it's Moorish, meaning that they are people of color. OK, meaning that they were so-called people of color. So the next thing I want to do, we're going to move to the next book. See what our next picture is. All right. So we have a picture right here of some indigenous Moorish peoples of the Americas. At the top, we have a picture of people from North America, misnomer African American. You can see them right here at the top. Look like two brothers and a sister, look like just some young so-called black people. And on the left hand side over here, you can see these are their ancestors from North America. In the middle down here, you have people from ancient Peru, misnomer Afro-Peruvians. You can see them right here in the middle on the right hand side. Look like two regular so-called black people. And on the left over here, you have their ancient indigenous ancestors from ancient Peru or ancient Jerusalem. All right. And at the bottom down here, you have the misnomer for Afro-Venezuelans. You have three Moorish young women down here at the bottom. And on the left hand side, you have some of their ancestors from ancient Venezuela, the Moorish indigenous peoples down there. So as you can see, whether it was in South, Central, or North America, that the culture was somewhat the same. We all wore the plume feathers. We all had the serpent culture. It was all the same. Just certain minor differences. OK, just certain small minor differences. All right. So let's go to our next book with information. So we're going to come back to this picture. So what you have right here is King Midas, the black or the Moorish Jew or Moorish Hebrew of Phrygia. Now, this is very, very important. Now, first, I want you to pay attention to his beard and his hair. You can see it's curly, just like the so-called black man's. And as you can see on his head, he's wearing the Trojan or the Phrygian cap. All right. Keep this in mind. Let's read. The blown up image in front of you is that of King Midas of Phrygia or Troy. And on the day of Pentecost, representatives from Phrygia or Troy were present in Jerusalem. In the book of Acts, Luke writes that Jews or Judeans came from every nation under earth. Ancient Anatolia is modern Turkey, and the people of Troy and Phrygia inhabited this place at the same time. Josephus, the Jewish historian, said that the people of Troy were Jews. Geoffrey of Monmouth stated in his Historiam Britium that the men of Troy/Phrygia settled in Britain. One of the problems that I have with modern scholars is that they dismiss the report of the ancients. The seed of Dara, which is from Judah, landed in Ireland and Scotland or Scotia, and the seed of Calcol or Judah landed in Britain with Brutus. All right. So this is why I say that the indigenous Americans, us over here, have a connection to the ancient Britons through the Phrygians and the Trojans. Okay. Because believe it or not, these were so-called black people as well. All right. So as you can see right here, this is an ancient Phrygian or Trojan. And these people left modern day what you call Anatolia or Turkey. And a lot of them settled in what we call Britain or Britannica through the general Brutus going over there and closing and opening up shop. OK, so keep in mind, now this is very important for you to understand that this ancient Phrygian or ancient Trojan, this king right here, because in a minute you're going to see some American people with the same type of attire on. All right. So let's get ready to move on to the next section that we're going to be reading. Okay. No, we're not going here yet. All right. So let's see. So right here we have a picture of North American indigenous Moorish peoples right here in North Carolina, modern day North Carolina. And over here we have indigenous American peoples from Peru. As you can see, they're the same peoples and they have the same type of headdress on as well. Now, right here, I want you to notice this Moorish man from Peru is wearing a Phrygian cap. And I want you over here to notice that this brother right here in the middle with the red cap on, he's wearing a Phrygian cap as well. So you have to understand that this man from North Carolina in America and this man from from Peru in America is wearing the same type of hat as King Midas of Phrygia and Troy, showing you that this is all an international empire and these are really the same people. So just because I say the ancient Phrygians or the ancient Trojans, I'm still talking about indigenous Americans, because believe it or not, there is a Troy even in America. There is an Athens in America. So a lot of those Grecian cities that you all know of, they also exist in America as well. So let's continue. All right. The Black American Indian. I wanted to see if me and you are on the same page. I have developed 3 schools of thought concerning the matter. Let me read this. I want to see if we are on the same page. Have you been asking yourself the same question that I've been asking myself throughout the first 4 chapters of this book? If these Black Scots existed, what happened to them? I have developed 3 schools of thought concerning this matter. So what the author is proposing now is if the Americas and the 13 colonies was started by the Black Scottish, the Black Welsh, the Black Britannicans, where are they? Did these people cease to exist because they started the colonies in the early 1600s? But we already know that there was an indigenous population here as well. So what happened to the Black Scots? Let's see what the author proposes. I have developed 3 schools of thought concerning this matter. 1, huge percentages of the Black Scots got absorbed into the Black Indian population. 2, the whites exterminated the indigenous Indians along with the Black Scots, and the history of the Black Scots has been merged together with the history of the Black slaves in the South. Now, it's probably a little bit of both, okay? When the Caucasian Slavs started to intrude into the Americas, no matter if you was a Black Scottish, Irish, Welsh in America, or if you was an indigenous Cherokee, Choctaw, Yamasee in America, if you was a Moorish people or a copper-colored person, they was looking to take all of us out. So some of our people were, killed by the invading Caucasus peoples. They were killed that way. And another thing is the reason why you don't know where a lot of these Black Scots, Black Irish, and Black Welshmen went is because when they came to the Americas, they actually absorbed and included themselves in the communities of the indigenous Americans. So that means that when the Scottish came here, they started to hang out with people that looked like this. So when the Black Scottish, the Black Irish, when they came here, they had their same Israelite culture, but they started to hang out with people that looked like this and was dressing like this. So they started to look like they were from the land, although they may have been from Scotland and Ireland. And after a few generations, you had people who were ancestrally from Scotland or Ireland, But once they started having children, their children were literally American. And then they started to take on certain indigenous American cultures, etc. So what I'm here to propose is that a lot of the more Scots, Irish, Welsh that did come here, they started to intermarry with a lot of the indigenous tribal American people who were along the eastern coast and in the south. And because they were both Shemitic or melanated people, when they intermarried and had children, their children still looked the same. And we actually are the result of those people today. So that's why I say that maybe 30 to 40% of our ancestry could come from the British Isles. And that other 60 to 70% comes from the indigenous Americas, from people that look like this on the screen. All right. So honestly, you cannot say that you are all indigenous American or that you're all, Moorish Europa. You couldn't say that. You would have to try to put a percentage between the two, and in the research that I read in this brother's book, he was saying that he found that most so-called African Americans have 30% European ancestry. So that means that the other 70% will come from the indigenous Americas. All right. Now let's look at this picture right here of the Phrygian cap that you see. Once again, this red cap in the middle. This is the Phrygian cap, the same hat that the Trojan king would wear. All right, let's read this. I slowed this image down so that you could see that something is not right with the image. The Indian on the right has a crown on his head. So let me go to that picture. So that's the Phrygian cap. But the Indian with the crown on his head would be this person right here. So you see this person in the top left with this skull crown with the plume feathers in it. This is the first person he's talking about. He's talking about this person with the crown on with a skull. And then the second person he's going to be talking about is this person with the Phrygian cap in the middle. And he's going to show you that there's a difference between the two. The Indian on the right has a crown on his head, meaning this person up here in the top left has a crown on his head. I have never seen an American Indian wearing a crown, have you? The Indians on the left appear to have the Indians on the left appear to have on Roman clothing and a Phrygian cap. So he's talking about these Indians right here. He said that these aboriginals from North America appear to have on Roman clothing and a Phrygian cap because the ancient Roman Carthaginian Empire also was in the Americas. So the same culture you're going to see in the Americas. He says the Indians on the left appear to have on Roman clothing and a Phrygian cap. The Phrygians were black Jews that were present in Jerusalem on the day of Pentecost. The cap that the Indian is wearing is identical to the cap that King Midas is wearing on page 40 in this book. Once again, so this hat right here that this brother is wearing, this red hat, is the same as the hat worn by King Midas. Same hat because it's the same people on different sides of the Atlantic. All right. Moving on. The cap that the Indian is wearing is identical to the cap that King Midas is wearing on page 40 in this book. It says the imagery suggests that the Indians wearing the crown, Roman clothing, and Phrygian cap have a more advanced civilization than the Indian on the right. So what he's saying is based on the attire that these indigenous Americans right here had a more advanced civilization than these indigenous Americans up here. All right. As you can see, these people up here are still naked. And it's another thing in their culture you're going to see, too. It says that the Indian on the right is wearing a skull on his headdress, which violates the statutes of God. The touching of dead men's bones make you unclean for 7 days. What does this mean? This means that two different black civilizations are being represented as one people when in fact they are not. So in previous tapes, I told you all that the Americas, prior to the Europeans coming here, it was always populated by copper-colored Moorish peoples. But some of us were a little more civilized than the others. And I'll give you an example of that. So, me, for example, like I live in the city, but majority of my family is from the country in the South. And when I'm in the city, I get access to certain technology, certain things going on in politics and government, and certain resources and literature that they may not have access to in the country. So that means that I may be a little more up to speed on what's going on in the modern world than some of my family members in the country. So that means as I'm up here in the civilization in the city, I'm dressed in the more modern way. I'm talking the more modern way. our spiritual practices are the more modern ways, etc. Whereas a lot of my family members in the country, they may still be doing outdated practices, still doing things that were traditional that we're not necessarily doing anymore because we've either learned something new or we just not doing that no more. Like I still got family members that eat chitlins and stuff like that, whereas Blackbeard, I don't eat none of that. I don't eat pork at all, but they from the country. So look at how I'm from the city and I'm the same person as the people from the country, but my civilization is a little different. I'm a little more updated and up to speed on what's going on. It was the same way in the ancient world. So you may have had these Moors up here in the top left, and they may have been living a more remote life. They may have not known all what was going on in government. They may have not been keeping up with all the Europeans that's coming in along the Eastern Shore and trying to, exchange culture with them and try to learn what's going on in the Far East. They may have just been cool with how they was living in the country. You know what I'm saying? I ain't saying there's nothing wrong with that. But when the authors say that some of us may have been a little more civilized than the others, because some of us were living an extremely remote life. So when you see, indigenous Americans running around naked with no clothes on and stuff like that, that could have been some of those people living in the countryside that was minding their own business and they was chilling. But they may have not known that the world has now moved to a more monotheistic culture. They may have not known that we don't do pagan worship no more. We're not sacrificing animals no more. And the reason why they didn't know that is because they weren't in the cities. They weren't in the more civilized areas. So that's what he's talking about. So when he say that this person up here has a skull on their crown, that means that they probably were doing certain practices that certain ancient Israelites may have not done. And maybe these people are Israelites, but just forgot that they weren't supposed to be dealing with, touching a dead man's bones and things of that nature. Whereas some of these Moors down here in the middle, as you can see, they got on more of a Roman attire. And when we say in Roman, we really still mean ancient Judean as well, because a lot of the ancient Judeans were living in Roman captivity. And Rome eventually stole Judah's culture, believe it or not. So let's do a time check real quick. All right, we're doing good. So hopefully that made sense. Some of us here was living in a more up-to-date culture. Some of us was still living a little more remote culture, and it's the same way today. Just like how we got brothers and sisters that still living in the projects, that still drink faucet water. They still eat hot Cheetos for dinner. You know what I'm saying? They still eat candy all day. They still think dropping out of school is cool. They still think having a bunch of children out of wedlock is cool. Just certain things that you may do in the hood. And then you got some of us that may have been educated. And then we've learned that, okay, you may need to have children when you can provide for them. You may need to eat certain type of food because it's healthier for you. You may need to drink more water because it's healthy for you. So we both the same people, but we just live in two different lifestyles, you see. So a lot of us have been kind of confused because they have lumped all of us into being so-called black people. But in the ancient world, we were not all unified in that type of way. You identify with the people whose culture was similar to yours. So that's me. Like as an indigenous American man, if I saw some indigenous people and they had bones through their nose, you know what I'm saying, and sacrificing, animals and stuff like that, I don't identify with those people just because they got melanin. So we don't need to get tricked by that thing by just because the person is so-called black, because that really doesn't mean much. So the next thing we're going to do is we're going to look at this picture of Chief Powhatan. This is a picture of Chief Powhatan in front of you. And this was the emperor of modern day Virginia around the time of the colonies being set up. This is also the father of who we call Mataoka or Pocahontas. So this is how Pocahontas' father looked. And Pocahontas more than likely would have looked like somebody like, let me give you an example. It was a dark-skinned American woman that you all may know. Whoopi Goldberg. Let's just say Whoopi Goldberg. Pocahontas would have looked more like, a North American indigenous woman. She was not from the line of Ham. She was a Shemite, okay? And this is her father right here. So, like Whoopi Goldberg, as far as I'm concerned, I think she's from North America, but she just looked like a so-called dark-skinned black woman from North America. All right. So that image of Pocahontas from Disney is not true. Just as well as that image of Captain John Smith is not true. Captain John Smith was a Moorish Highlander from Scotland, and Pocahontas was an indigenous empress, or princess rather, from America. Okay. So let's read. It says, Indian of the Powhatan and Pocahontas period. So that's what you're looking at, Chief Powhatan. In the early 1600s, Chief or John Smith, explorer of the first permanent English colony, described the indigenous people that he was at war with on the eastern shore of North America in Jamestown, Virginia. The Powhatan Indians, the Algonquin chief, quote, was more like a devil than a man, with some 200 more as black as himself. And this information by John Smith is found in the General History of Virginia, New England, and the Summer Isles, originally published in 1624, republished in 1966. So Captain John Smith, who was a Highlander, who was a so-called black man, when they came here, I'm not saying that they didn't go to war with some of the indigenous tribes, because they did. You know, you got to remember, if you was an indigenous tribal person here and you're starting to see this influx of all these foreigners come, you don't really know who's friendly and who's hostile. So, of course, Chief Powhatan and a lot of the other Floridian emperors of America, they was going to war with them. And after a while, you know, if they could get along with some of them, they did. And if they couldn't, they just kept going to war, you know. So once again, this is just substantiating what Benjamin Franklin and William Penn said, that the indigenous Americans were a swarthy people. Also, too, a lot of pictures of our people can be seen in cigar shops. So if you go to a lot of cigar shops in America and especially in Europe, you will find a lot of these statues of copper-colored Moorish American peoples, you know, smoking marijuana, smoking cigar, etc. Smoking tobacco, excuse me. And as you can see the physique, the build, the lips, the nose. You can tell this is a so-called black man. So this is the chief of Virginia in the early 1600s, the father of Pocahontas. And this is how Pocahontas and her people would have looked as well. So how many of you all know so-called black people from Virginia that look just like this? You know, probably a lot. Once again, this is another picture of Chief Powhatan, the Moorish king of modern day, quote unquote, Virginia. So what we have right here in front of us is a picture of Floridian kings. All right, let's read about it. So it says that there was in the first a very large black Indian of a very different, quote, the original Floridian Indian. So that's what we're looking at, the kings of Florida or America. When I say Florida, I'm talking about America. So this is a picture of a Floridian king from 1723. This is a picture from a Floridian king in the 19th century or the 1800s. Also, you can see he's wearing a Phrygian cap. So the Phrygian cap or the Trojan cap, that's a Moorish hat. And also you can see this another Floridian king from 1671. So there was Florida kings or American kings all throughout history, but they don't want you all to know about them. So if you know about King Tut and these Egyptian kings, you should certainly know about the American ones. So here's one from 1671. Here's one from the 1800s. Here's one from 1723. Kings of Florida. Once again, Floridian king of 1723. Floridian king, American king of the 1800s. Floridian or American king of 1671. So let's read about them real quick. It says that, and this is by the history of Hernan de Soto in Florida by Bernard Ship. So a lot of the Spaniards, when they came here in the late 1400s, early 1500s, when they invaded Central America, they came up through the Gulf Coast, and then they invaded Florida and Alabama and Georgia and the Carolinas. And I go into that deeper in my book. But let's read what Hernando de Soto wrote. And also, too, Hernando de Soto was a so-called black man from Spain. So once again, a lot of these Europeans was coming here going to war with, you know, a lot of so-called black Americans. So it still was, you know what I'm saying, Moors versus Moors or blacks versus blacks. So he writes, there was in the first a very large black Indian of a aspect very different from those who inhabit the interior of the earth. The barbarians of the coast are black in this manner because the sun is warmer there than anywhere else, and because they are continually in the water, which is salt, for the land being sterile and dry. They are obliged to fish in order to subsist. When the Indian had approached the caravel near enough, he placed himself on the prow of his vessel, and a voice full of haughtiness told the Spaniards, according to what the interpreter asserted, that the Spaniards were robbers, What did they come to seek upon the coast, and that they should leave it in haste? Otherwise he would burn their brigantes and put them all to a miserable death. So the Spaniards right here are recording that when they came into Florida, that a lot of the Florida peoples were starting to approach them, and that the Florida king asked them, why are you all here? And you all are here as robbers, and if you don't leave, we're going to put you to death. So that's a lie when they tell you that the American kings just gave up their land and just sold their land away for some moonshine and all that shit. A lot of that was a lie. These men were shedding blood and killing these Europeans here, you know, and a lot of that information I'll probably come out with in the future. And we're going to wrap it up with this. You cannot tell the difference between the so-called black Indian and the so-called blacks that were on the original 13 colonies. Once the original Scots founded the land, they began to populate the Americas, and thus you would have black Scots who became Indians or Americans by birth. So this is where the black Scottish, the black Irish, the black Welsh, this is where they ended up. They ended up in the families of a lot of the indigenous Americans. And because they looked the same, when they would marry and have children, you wouldn't be able to tell if they were once a Scottish or if they was originally the American. All right. So hopefully this tape provided some more insight to some stuff. You know, hopefully you learned a lot. But this is where we at with it. You know, so once again, indigenous South American, indigenous North American, / Phrygian / Trojan / Eturian / Etruscan / Basque / Moorish Basque. Okay. And this is them as well. All right. So y'all stay tuned for the next one. Y'all tell me what y'all think about this one. I'm out.